This 96-year-old woman could no longer live in her cottage because she had to go to a care home, and so she decided to donate her home to a homeless person who was always nearby. He was desperate to have a roof over his head, and so he moved in good spirits. Stephen stood in front of the house with bated breath. He could barely believe that this house was now his. He made his way inside with the key the lawyer gave him. Looking around, it immediately felt all so familiar again. Everything was as he remembered it. A large suitcase was lying on the table. With his hands shaking, he slowly opened the suitcase and his jaw instantly dropped. "I can't believe she has done this." Ellie Barnes was a 96-year-old woman living in rural Alaska. She'd grown up nearby and had never felt the need to leave. She loved the area almost as much as she loved Peter, her husband of 72 years. Ellie preferred the peace and quiet of the open land, and one of her favorite things to do was just sit on the porch with Peter when the seasons allowed. But soon her simple life was about to be turned upside down. One day, Peter passed away unexpectedly after a short battle in the hospital. Ellie was stunned. In spite of their age, she'd never stopped to really think about what might happen if Peter died first. He'd always been the healthier of the two of them. What was she going to do without him? Their children hadn't exactly fallen in love with Alaska. They'd chosen to move far away and head south to the continental United States. Both of Ellie's daughters offered to take her in if she wanted to move to either Boston or Dallas. Ellie had moved to Alaska as a young child and met Peter on her first day of school. There wasn't much for two kids to do except play in their yards or ride bicycles together. Ellie dreamed about marrying Peter and starting a magnificent life together. It didn't exactly go according to plan. Once they were married, Ellie and Peter struggled to find steady work. All they could afford was a small rancher with a single bedroom and a tiny living area. It wasn't glamorous, but they tried to make it work by saving for repairs as often as possible. By the time Peter passed away, it felt like the house had been patched and mended a million times. With winter coming soon, she needed help making sure that the house could survive another year of snow. But who was left to help her? Luckily, Ellie was able to get help from one of her neighbors. They'd been friendly for years, and they offered to see what they could do to keep the house in order. Ellie's neighbors were getting up in age and couldn't do a lot of the manual labor that Ellie needed to fix the house. Stephen hadn't exactly found Ellie's beloved town to be a welcoming place. Stephen had been trying to find a job to no avail. There were few opportunities in such a rural area, and he could never make enough to move out on his own. He hated relying on his parents for support, but without even a car, he couldn't drive farther away in search of work. Stephen was healthy and strong enough to do a lot of the work at Ellie's house that his parents couldn't manage. He had free time on his hands, and he started pitching in to help Ellie however he could. Ellie tried to pay him, but Stephen always refused. When Stephen first returned to town, everyone in the small community knew that he'd been homeless. But Ellie and Peter had welcomed him immediately and pulled him out of his slump by inviting him to dinner every once in a while. Stephen kept taking care of Ellie in any way he could. He went grocery shopping for her, cleaned the house, and even finished the repairs. Since Stephen wouldn't accept any money, she insisted on cooking him dinner. He spent so much time at her house that he didn't have any left to apply for jobs. And Stephen's lack of regular income was stretching their budget far too thin. Stephen's parents told him that he had to choose between helping Ellie and living at home. They couldn't continue to support him if he wasn't going to make an effort to support himself. Stephen told his parents that he wasn't willing to abandon Ellie. They'd spent months together, and he considered her his only friend. He knew that if he left town, he would have better opportunities in one of the bigger cities. That would mean leaving Ellie behind. He could still call her and catch up, but he wouldn't be there anymore to help her with errands. But as Stephen packed, he wasn't even worried about what the future in the city would hold. All he could think about was saying goodbye to Ellie. Stephen went to break the news to Ellie. She was devastated by the news. They had both grown close after spending so much time together. Ellie knew she could try to sell the home, but it would obviously not bring in much money. He decided to bring a lawyer in to help her make sure the transfer of the home would go smoothly. Ellie also wasn't even sure if Stephen wanted her old house. When Stephen got the call from the lawyer, he was extremely surprised and somewhat unsure about what to do now. He never expected Ellie to leave the house she loved so much, let alone give it to him. The more he thought about it, the less he actually wanted to live in rural Alaska again. Stephen felt a lot more at home in the big city, and he'd already determined that he wanted to stay here. Stephen's next move was to call Ellie. He, of course, wanted to thank her for giving him the house and wanted to know how she was doing. But he also hoped she could give him an explanation for the strange condition. But Stephen could not get a hold of Ellie. No matter how often he tried, the phone just kept going to voicemail. Suddenly, Stephen started to worry. The lawyer had not given him any explanation as to why Ellie had moved out of the house, only why she wanted to give it to him. At the time, he didn't think to ask and just accepted it at face value. Could Ham, having visited the house, have something to do with this? He first thought that Ellie maybe wanted to restore the bond between him and his parents, and that is why he had to show up, still very unsure. Stephen decided he would travel to the house the very next day. The lawyer had paid for his transport to the house. When Stephen arrives in the town, he goes straight to Ellie's house. He doesn't want his parents to know that he's there, so he avoids even getting close to their house. When he enters the house with the keys he picked up from the lawyer, he is surprised by the 2 new locks on the door. At first, it seems like there is nothing else different about the place, but then he spots that there is a large suitcase placed on the dining table. Unsure if this was left here for him, he approaches the suitcase and quickly sees that his name was written on it. Stephen realized that this was Ellie's doing as he recognized the handwriting. When he opened the suitcase, he quickly discovered it was full of small envelopes for fixing the gutter, for cleaning the kitchen, for taking her for a walk, all things that Stephen had done for Ellie and Peter over the years. But now the best part comes. In all the envelopes was a bit of money, bills ranging from 10 to 20 to even 50 pounds at some point. After Stephen unpacked all of them and counted the money, he concluded that it came out to a total of about $15,000. Ellie explained that he had earned all this over the past 2 years but never accepted it, so this was her way of paying Stephen back for all his kindness and help? Stephen was absolutely brought to tears by this. This money would change his life forever, and on top of that, he was extremely relieved that Ellie was still alive. Having a somewhat solid base now, Stephen was able to completely turn his life around. He fairly quickly found a job and started working himself up through the ranks, and when he is in town, he would always go past Ellie's house to fix it up where needed. He still owns the house and rents it out to a local couple who are starting their own family there. Stephen would see Ellie one more time before she passed away. He went to visit her in the retirement home about 6 months after she had given him the house and the money. He could call a million times, but he had to thank her at least once in person, thank the person who changed his life forever.